Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tech Tip Talk. I'm Sarah Walworth.
I'm Christina McGrath, and we are Knitting Tech Editors.
So, here on Tech Tip Talk, we answer your questions about tech editing, knitting pattern writing, and knitting design. If you have any questions for us, we invite you now to throw them into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them during this broadcast.
This month, we're so excited. We're talking with Jen Parroccini, who is a knitting designer and educator committed to clothing justice for all makers. In her exquisite patterns, classes, and genius newsletters and articles, she is giving us the tools to get us there. If you're not following what she's doing, now is your chance. Sarah and I have been big admirers of Jen and her work right along, and we're really excited that she is going to talk with us about her business.
Super excited. So, let's bring her up.
Hey.
Hey. Welcome to Tech Tip Talk.
Frame.
Hi,
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that sweet introduction, Christina. And it's funny to hear you say that you've been fans of my work, because obviously I'm huge fans of y'all's work, and I have been following you and since the beginning of my design journey. So it's really an honor to be here today, and I'm very excited.
That's
We
awesome.
are psyched to have you. We're so happy.
So excited. So let's get to that start when you started your design journey. How did you get started working in the knitting industry?
Like most people, I'd been a knitter for a long time. I was looking for something specific that I wanted to cast on and couldn't find it. I was like, well, I'll just make it up. And, I'd played with the idea of doing design work for a while. I had a lot of anxiety around it. And then eventually I was like, you know what? Everybody who is a rock star designer had a first pattern. So let me try it. Let me try it and see where it goes. And I just tried to stay really open to different things that I wanted to learn. And decided to treat it like a 3-year apprenticeship that I didn't actually have to pay for. So I kind of built out things that I wanted to learn and made a list and just started tackling that kind of thing.
That's so smart. I mean, to make a plan like that.
That's brilliant. What kind of things did you have in your 3-year plan?
Well, it's funny because things did not go according to plan, and I actually ended up quitting my job after 2 years. So I'm just coming up on my 3rd year now. But learning to grade, right? I started with kids patterns. And partly that's because I was knitting for a kid, but also that's how I learned to knit. So I learned to knit by crashing through kids patterns at a time when nobody in my life had kids. And so it was a little bit weird. But so people have kids eventually and they'll grow into them. It doesn't really matter. So it was a way for me to kind of get a bunch of different experiences with different constructions. And that was the approach that I took when I did, when I started designing too. It's like, okay, I wanted to learn to design a raglan, or I wanted to learn to design a saddle shoulder, the different types of constructions, grading. I've been learning a lot about different types of wool and different types of yarn and how they behave and what their properties are. Something that never really could stick in my head before I really needed it, right? There's so many things that are technical that until you build those bookshelves in your brain for that information to stay on, like those books just go kind of back to the library after you've used them, right? So yeah, and then from a business perspective, like learning to have a website or learning to show up on video without sweating through my clothes out of anxiety, or like learning to do a newsletter. So all sorts of things from the business to the technical design side.
Love it.
I want to ask a question that we didn't originally talk about, but since I said it in my introduction, I think a lot of people watching us might not understand what you mean by clothing justice. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think that everybody deserves equal access to clothes that fit them well and reflect their identities and make them feel amazing. And that's not something that we have in our society today. And it's also not something that a lot of people have access to if they want to make their own clothes. Making our own clothes is something that for many people is linked to who we perceive ourselves to be and how we create the world that we want to live in, right? Whether that's slow making or buying locally or supporting BIPOC makers, or thinking about like labor justice around the world when we look at how fast fashion clothes are made. And so there are a lot of people who are excluded from the opportunity to participate in that work. And so I believe that everybody should be able to do that, no matter what their size is or what their ability is. Yeah, and I think we'll talk about this later, or what their shape is.
Yes.
Because even though we've done a lot in this particular part of the handmade clothes industry with size inclusion, we haven't done much to address the fact that there's still one shape that's considered acceptable for clothing. And so I'm really focused on making patterns that give people a way to do that, either by following the pattern directly or making it kind of modification ready, and by providing a lot of education on how to get those fits that gets those handmade items like kind of out of the drawer and onto your body, so that you can participate in that and show up like yourself.
Out of the drawer and onto the body. I love this. And I also love, I think you had, like, in one of your newsletters, you mentioned making, when you hand make something that fits you well, it never hits the closet floor. And that just resonates so much with how we want our clothing to make us feel.
Well, it's literally drawn from experience. Like, before I learned to make my own clothes, like, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to fix this wardrobe situation I have, and go out and spend all this money on clothes, like, from what was available in stores. And like, man, it would all need dry cleaning or special care, and it would just literally be on a heap on the bottom of my closet floor. So yeah, it's very literal.
But it's something we can all identify with as makers and as people who wear clothes. It's very true. We want things that we love to be in, that we don't want to cast away, but we want to embrace.
Yeah.
So just that focus is so important. I mean, it's obviously one of the things we love the most about you is your focus on that. Sarah, you want to ask her another question?
Sure. Yeah. So maybe back up a little bit. Tell us what your specialty is as a knitwear designer. What do you love to design?
I love to design things that you will actually can imagine wearing multiple days per week. I think that there's a lot of novelty knitwear. There's a lot of outerwear. But I like to design things that they might not always be flashy, but they have a place in regular rotation in your life. And so for me, that tends to be, in general, things that are lighter weight, things with good structure, things that have textural interest, but that can be combined with other things in your wardrobe.
That's pretty exciting.
So since we talked about clothing justice, we talked about those types of garments you like to design, and you purposefully design garments to be inclusive and accessible, but no one design will fit everybody. So how do you decide what type of body to design for when you go to do that?
Yeah, so I love this question because there's like a million different things we could talk about here. I think this is so juicy.
It's complicated, right? Yeah. Like, how do you tick all the boxes, you know? Like,
okay, we only have an hour. We only have an hour.
I know, sorry. Oh.
So I think, okay, so like many people who have an activist inclination to their work, I'm coming from personal experience. So a lot of the designs that I design for are for, you know, an AFAB, an assigned female at birth body, probably with breasts, and with a poorly defined or ill-defined waist or an apple shape, right? Because that's a shape that's not well designed for or well represented in the fashion world or in the knitting world. And so my designs tend to be waist agnostic and ready for the girls.
And it's a very common shape. So this is something I don't think is addressed, is that apple shape is not uncommon.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not what we see promoted, right?
No,
it's not what we see. Yeah, exactly. But I do grapple a lot with who gets left out when I design for that shape. I know that as much as that's underrepresented, there are trans bodies that are even more underrepresented. And I grapple with this, right? And so one of the things that I've come to see to my current framework for this is to design for one shape, and it doesn't have to be a gendered experience of wearing those patterns, as long as the shape is well done. And I also think that we do our best work in this world when we pick a thread to unravel that we feel really passionate about, and then uplift the work of people unraveling those other threads. And so, Yeah, I do design for that AFAB body. But yeah, I think that it's important that we continue to grapple with the implications of who we exclude and who we invite into the conversation when we do that, because that's who the knitting industry has always served. So yeah.
Do you think it's okay to serve one shape? Like maybe that's your brand?
Yeah, I
Or
think we have to. I think we have to be clear about who exactly we're serving. But that it's equally important that we make room and spotlight and highlight the work of people who are serving those other customers too.
Like you were saying, this is this, but these people are doing this.
Yeah, yeah,
and there's room for all these workers, like workers, all this work.
Yeah, like you could be really passionate about fundraisers for ALS, and that doesn't mean that you hate people who are fundraising for leukemia, right?
exactly.
And so, yeah, I do. I think that, I feel pretty passionately about serving this particular customer just because it's one that's been so long marginalized by fashion and so long marginalized by media, and even in the knitting industry, like the most popular designs are really body conscious, waist conscious designs. And yeah, so I think it is somewhere that we need to add more value for knitters. And I hold that intention.
Well, and I think when you have that focus of who exactly you're serving and what body type you're designing for, shapes, you can get better fit. You can do a better job, when you can zero in like that.
Yeah.
And I think it actually makes things more inclusive. So if we each have our particular portion of the population that we're serving, that leaves room for all of us to have our own service within what the various needs are in our area.
Yeah. And, I think the bodies that we have, because they're so independent of our gender expression, I think there's a lot of room. And one of the things that I'm excited to do in the next, 18 months here is, maybe have some designs that are for this body, but that don't have, like maybe that much of a feminine, maybe turn up the masculine vibe a little bit, right? And invite more people of different genders with this body to participate in knitting. Because I think that there's a gap there too.
Yeah.
Yep. And still with all the sizes that you're offering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you find it difficult to find sizing for this shape?
I think no, I don't. And mostly it's because of the silhouettes that I'm doing are waist agnostic to start with, right? So um, I'm not making body conscious designs for apple shapes. I'm making, designs that are waist agnostic or that skim, or a lot of my designs now have more hip shaping. I haven't done a straight sweater in, I don't think, like a year or so.
So define waist agnostic. So maybe our audience might not be familiar with this use of the word.
Of this phrase that I made up.
I love it. Neologisms are my jam. I love it.
No, you use the best terms. I love it.
Yeah, so they're basically just designs where it doesn't matter what your waist does or doesn't do. They're more likely to work for you. So they won't have waist shaping, but they might have hip shaping or gentle A-line shaping. Yeah.
I love it.
And they won't nip in or be snug. I don't do negative ease, torsos, that kind of thing.
This is the beauty of making our own clothing. We get to decide this. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. If you're joining us live, please jump into the chat and ask us any questions that pop up in your head while we're chatting, because we'd love to answer them.
Oh, and you got, I know we want to talk to her about her business and everything, but I love talking about all this shape and sizing and fit, and I love it so much. We could talk about this all day, but we have to move on.
Go ahead, Christina. You want to grab the next one?
Yeah. So let's shift focus. What are the values you feel are important to prioritize as a small business owner? I mean, also like fiber business owner, but
Yeah. I feel like there's just so many things, but that they can be summed up with having a really good relationship with your customer. And so that is going to be integrity. It's going to be generosity. It's going to be fairness and equity. It's going to be gratitude. But just really honoring the person at the other end of the pattern. When I decided that I was really going to make adult patterns, there's a bit of a terror that comes from that, right? Especially if you're trying to serve people who haven't been well served. They're going to trust you. They're going to spend their money on your thing. They're going to spend their time on your thing. And, when we're talking about these larger sizes, that's a huge commitment. It takes a lot of trust. And so I think that just remembering the person on the other end, having an experience with my product is the number one value that I bring. And so, that means I try not to cut corners. I bring as much integrity as I can to the way that I'm designing, and the way that I'm putting my classes together. Yeah.
I think it swung back around to what you mentioned before about service.
Mm-hmm. I'm in the service industry. Absolutely.
Exactly. So on the one hand, you're producing a product, but on the other hand, the end goal is to serve your customer.
Yeah, no, the end goal is that the person has a better relationship with their own body and their own hands and their own tools and their own materials. Like, the sweater is just one way to get there.
And being thoughtful of the maker and putting out a solid, good product that they're going to use is how is important too, right? To get there.
Yeah.
I love that. Like, keeping that in your mind all the time. Who's on the other end of your pattern is awesome.
Yeah. I want people to open up my patterns or to see any release and be like, this was made for me. And just to experience a sense of delight and feeling seen, which is a fairly lofty goal. But that's the experience I want somebody to have. I want somebody to be like, you're reading my diary, like you're reading my journal. I've been waiting my whole life for this and didn't even know it. Or this is really transformed. Clothing is so personal. It's so personal. It's how we see ourselves. It's how we present ourselves to the world. It's a huge part of our identity, and being trusted to be a part of that is a really big deal.
And to fill in the need for someone where they might not have realized they need this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What a beautiful way to approach the design process.
Well, but that's what it is, right? I mean, we've talked about that before. Like, a knitting pattern is clothing. That's what it is. So I love that so much.
And clothing is so much, I think that it's really a sign of the sexist world that we live in, right? That clothing is like fashion is treated as frivolous, but it's not. It's not. It's how we present ourselves and how we show up in the world and how we have some agency over the way that we're perceived by others.
Yeah. Agency. I love that word. That's something that I think can happen a little bit more in our industry is giving agency to the various people who may not have it because of the way things are set up. So how do you maintain a healthy mindset in the relentlessness of running a business? Because really, that's how we feel.
I don't.
Nobody does. How do I try? So I think I have a little bit of an advantage in that the way that my brain works, I just get really, really, really deeply and obsessively into things. And that can last several years at a time. And so right now, running this business and doing this work is my special interest, and it's actually really hard to turn it off. So I have been working this fall on trying to be like a whole person who does more than one thing, has multiple dimensions. But I think part of it is like, okay, figuring out different things in your business that you can work on that are interesting to you. So if you really hate doing your website, like don't do your website all the time, right? So have some things about running your business as a whole that are really interesting to you and engaging and fun, and tackling some of those and leaving room to, in your schedule, like blocking off time to do idea generation and to get excited and to zoom out and be like, hey, this is my like small business that I'm running and I care about it. And just having different things that you're constantly learning. I find that if I'm not learning things, I get incredibly bored and frustrated. So zooming out, taking perspective, forcing myself to step away from the work sometimes, even in short bursts. And I try and do a lot of burnout prevention, because I know that with the way that my brain is, I can hyper focus on something for a few years and then I'm like, with a snap of my fingers, I'm done with it, right? And so thinking about
so tell us what that burnout prevention is, because I think we can probably use that advice over here on these two.
Everyone watching can use this advice.
So for me, it's being really clear on the why behind my work, which we've talked about, and thinking about other ways you can get there. So you heard me say a sweater is just one way to get there. So what are some other ways that we can get there, right? So part of that is education or teaching, but later on down the line, maybe it'll be sewing patterns, or maybe it will be, retreats, right? Or any other number of things, or any other number of other things that I can do that will still let me stay focused on my end goal. Like sweaters and coaching or consulting or the other things that I do right now are just one way of getting to that view of the world. And so I can work on this now as obsessively as I want to, and have a pivot in mind for later that will still carry on the momentum of what I care so deeply about, but like, let me switch up totally what I'm doing if I need to. And that comes from Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. So I found that book really useful in terms of thinking about like the long-term framework for this and how to prevent burnout.
That's very valuable. Do you find that you have to shift like what you do to prevent burnout, or is it generally just?
Not yet. I mean, like I said, I'm coming up on 3 years here, and I've only been doing it full time for 1. And I do step away as much as I can on the weekends, even if that's not easy. But I have a small child, I have a husband, I have a house. I've got a body that needs to be maintained, and I've got a bunch of chronic stuff going on. So that takes a huge chunk of my time. So I do have a lot of time away from my desk. And so I have not reached a point yet where I have felt like I need to do a pivot. I will say there are things that I have on my design schedule for next year that I think will be energetically fun for me, because they'll be new and they'll have a strong component of education and learning. So,
well, and like it's what you're talking about to prevent burnout is the same kind of thing you're talking about how you prioritize values in your business, and what you keep in mind, what you're designing for and who you're designing for. All of that everything is all keeping in focus your purpose and why you're doing it.
Yeah. And I come from a nonprofit background, right? Like I spent the last 13 years like working for nonprofits. And so like being mission-based and not letting that keep you up at night, and not letting it consume you entirely while still keeping it at the forefront of your work is something that nonprofits have to have a discipline around, particularly in an environment with scarce financial resources. So this is all really familiar territory for me, to just port right over to a similar experience in my small business. And not every small business needs to be about mission-based, right? Like there are plenty of people whose mission might just be to make the world more beautiful, and that's also valuable. But
I think you're doing that too. I think that's happening, making it beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very kind.
So let's swing around to education, because you mentioned this. One of our patrons asked this question.
We have a comment.
Hi, Jen.
In addition to Jen from Jen, and there's a picture of Jazz, her dog. In addition to crafting intentional garments, you publish informative educational material for knitters. What's in your toolkit that helps you to do it all?
Yeah, I don't do a ton of patterns every year. I do 8 to 10. I don't know if I've ever hit 10. 10's a goal. And that includes accessories. So I definitely am not doing 10 sweaters per year. And then I write a newsletter every week. For people who don't know, I write a newsletter every week. And most weeks, 75% to 80% of weeks, that includes an article that is technical in some way, right? So it's designed to educate. What's in my toolkit that helps me do it all? My kid goes to daycare. She's in kindergarten, half-day kindergarten. She has K-RAP, so I have full-time availability. And I also I get knitters to help me, right? So I get a lot of feedback from my audience on what they want to hear about, because so much of our time can be spent just trying to come up with what to write about. So I try and ask people what they want to hear about. And then I write about things that either I know about or that I'm interested about. That helps. And then I also reuse my content in any given week. So if you were on my newsletter and on my Instagram, last week you would have seen that I wrote a newsletter about taking better finished object photos. Really basic stuff. Like, I'm not a photographer. In fact, photographers will probably be angry about this email because it's designed for people who just want to really upgrade.
Right.
Bless knitters, but we make a lot of struggle pictures, and our knits deserve better. And I've been working really hard on that myself. And so I wanted to share what has worked well for me and what worked really well for me when I first started trying to take a better photo. So that went in my newsletter. And then the following week, it went onto my blog, right, with some updates. I love it when my audience writes feedback, because then I can kind of update some of those thoughts or expand them and have higher quality information on the blog. And so that goes on the blog. And then so the next email that goes out will be like, hey, if you missed it, this was on the blog. And then today I'm talking about it on Instagram, right? Because we all know that Instagram shows our stuff to 8% of the people who have told Instagram they want to hear from us. And so I no longer write for Instagram first. I write for my newsletter first. And my newsletter is my most treasured business asset.
Well, yeah, and if you guys don't get it, I mean, her newsletters are more than a newsletter. They're so good and so much work. So good.
They are. Yeah, they're a lot of work, but then at least that content is becoming kind of evergreen.
You're able to keep it on your website.
And it's not like one and done. It's value that people can continue to access, or that people can chime in on and have a conversation in the comments. I don't get a lot of that, but it's available to be kind of a piece that becomes part of a larger conversation.
Right.
And I think this is a tool, to have a multi-dimensionality to our work. It's you're not just designing and putting out a product and that people can buy, but you're also providing a service and information and education that brings people in, right? So it's this multifaceted.
Yeah, my patterns are never going to be for a huge, broad audience. There are 5 or 6 designers that we could all name who write all the patterns that we see at the big festivals, or we see in yarn stores, or we see in knit alongs or classes. And I don't think that I will ever write the kinds of patterns that are that kind of pattern. And so it's unlikely that I will ever meet my financial goals through patterns alone. I'd have to sell 12 or 15,000 $12 patterns per year to do that. And that's probably not something that I will achieve. And so for me, as a small business owner, it's been really important to think about what are some ways that I can diversify my income and do this work that I and my audience think is so important, because it's not going to be, patterns are not going to be the main thing. And that makes sense, right? Because what we're doing here is so much bigger than a single pattern, right? It's a movement. Mm-hmm.
So that leads to our next question. If this is a movement and what we're doing here is more important than just producing patterns, what would you like to see change in our industry?
Yeah. More different voices, more than anything else, more different voices. We have a huge concentration of power and financial resources in a top handful of designers. And so I'd like to see different voices, and I'd like to see pay. And there are a number of things that play into that. It's very complicated. I think that if I were gonna wave my magic wand, I would say that the people who are dominating this field, I would like to see them price their patterns at a rate that's fair, instead of underpricing them to take advantage of their first mover and their scale, right? So we have who can afford to publish patterns at below market rate, way less than what it costs to produce them because of the volume.
Way less.
And that's working really well for them. And it's not like I want anybody to not make a living, but they would still make a living. They would make the same living if they charged a fair rate for their patterns. The same number of people would buy them. We're talking about a difference of $3 or $4 here, people. Their customers are still going to buy them. They'd probably make even more money, but it would open the market up for other people, right? It would normalize those of us who didn't come in 10 or 15 years ago, who are putting more and more and more in our patterns because of this hypersaturation of garment patterns, right? So we, when I first started knitting, like you got a pattern and it had like 7 sizes and like you had to Google search everything you needed to do. The expectation now, especially for size inclusive patterns, is that like, that everything's in there. All the instructions are in there, of course, but like that it's for 12 sizes. And ideally you've got a couple shape modifications. There's a new account out here who's telling people that it's not inclusive unless it has at least one way of modifying for a different shape. Yeah. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but especially because no one's willing to pay for that, right? Like the work that designers are doing is largely uncompensated. It's very, very hard.
That's a problem. I mean, it's a problem.
Yeah, it is a problem.
It's like it's like you're explaining the expectations have been raised, but the compensation's not meeting that expectation.
Yeah, and increasingly there's an expectation that you film tutorials. I do not do that because my tutorials are garbage, and that you're available 7 days a week to answer, knitting support questions, which is fine as long as that work is compensated. Like it's the idea that should all be available for $6 a pattern, $9 a pattern. That is keeping new talent from entering the marketplace, and so we end up with people who are privileged enough to be able to do this, with a long startup investment, who are the ones who are doing all the work. And that I think is a big equity issue in our industry.
So how do we make this change? I mean, just raising pattern prices, would that do it, do you think?
It's structural, and I don't know the answer. I think we have to continue to grapple with it as an industry. Yeah, I mean, if everybody across the board agreed that $12 was kind of the minimum that a 20-page pattern should cost, I think that would be a good start.
I mean, it's crazy. It is crazy. And that's one of the things you were talking about with us earlier that's tricky, is having that issue, but coming from a place of generosity in your business, in what you are selling and what you are sharing and what you're teaching and what you're creating. Like, it's tricky.
Yeah, it is. And so for me, the answer has really been to give up on writing patterns as the core of my business model, and to begin thinking of the educational content that I do as the core of my business model. Because honestly, if everybody had the education to make patterns their own, we wouldn't need to rely so much on the patterns doing that work for us, right? Having said that, not everybody's going to enjoy making modifications. Some people just want to pick up a pattern and knit, and if it's close enough, that's also a fine way to be a knitter. Yeah, that's how I am.
I didn't used to be that way, but I've become that way after doing 7 years of tech editing. I'm like, I just want to sit and knit. I don't want to think about it.
Yeah. So I think that there has to be room for all experiences. There's no one right way, right?
So how do you balance this need to see a structural change in our industry with being radically generous? So in other words, there's a need for a better distribution of the assets in our industry, but how do you couple that with radical generosity? How does that work together for you in your head?
Yeah. So part of it is shifting my business to be partly supported by coffee and beginning to really think of this as community led, and that I'm just kind of a steward of that action. And making that decision really freed me up, right? So I did a knit along this summer. People really, we had a big juicy Instagram stories conversation. And I know Instagram is slammed for not being good at nuance, but I am particularly lucky that my audience is very good at gray areas. And so we had a really big, juicy conversation on Instagram about the Rhinebeck sweater phenomenon and who gets included in that, who gets excluded. And so we decided that we wanted to do a knit along, and that it shouldn't be limited to like one designer. I didn't want to limit it to just my designs, right? So I had a conversation with a couple of people in my audience, and we're like, you can say you want this to be inclusive, this knit along that you're going to do, but if you're just limiting it to your own designs, then how inclusive is that really? And so we decided to open it up, right? But like, I can't do that kind of work if I'm relying on pattern sales. If I'm tied to strictly like selling patterns as a way of generating income, then I can't do that. And so opening up the coffee, really seeing myself as putting people in touch with the resources that they need. I'm more of a conduit now. I'm less of a like designer first. Really has put me in a place where I can connect people with whatever pattern comes to mind that might be right for them, or whatever resource might be right for them, without needing to worry about how that's going to impact my ability to, feed my family.
And you're giving them the tools to work any pattern, and you're creating community.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the way that we're going to actually solve a lot of these problems in our industry is through community-led action. I don't think there's another way. We can't do it as individuals.
Yeah.
So you talked about people starting designing 15 years ago, like right about the time that the early aughts, when things were starting to be digitally produced.
Yeah.
What about now? What advice would you give to a designer who's just starting now, and where we are in our industry now?
So first of all, I would say be really clear that you need to do this as a business and not just a hobby, because it is a lot of work. So I think that there's a lot of people who see designing as the top rung on the ladder of being an apex knitter. And it's not. It's a separate sport. So if somebody, I'm assuming that you're saying somebody who wants to design as a commercial endeavor,
right?
They want to make money from their patterns,
right?
So be really clear on why you want to do it as a business, and that makes sense. And then I would say get help. I think it's really important to not do harm, right? There's nothing I think that is more soul crushing than putting yourself out there as somebody who does size inclusive design, because that's now, it feels like a requirement. Like that's basically a requirement now. If you want to be in online spaces making money as a pattern designer, you need to be offering a full range of sizes, and that's good. But there's this like grievous thing that happens where people don't know how to do that, and then they design patterns that don't fit those sizes well, and they make a promise that they can't keep. So I think that people need to get help. When they don't know what they're doing, they need to get help. And that could just be finding an editor or a consultant that can counsel them on their process and their schematic before they even get started. Or it could be taking a class. I know you, Sarah, because I took masterclass in grading with you. But yeah, I would say that you need to get help. You need to, don't make a promise you can't keep. Don't do harm. Don't do harm. And at the same time, don't look back. So you gotta kiss a lot of frogs. You gotta get out there and kiss a lot of frogs.
Oh, okay. You better explain what that is and where you got that from.
Yeah. It comes from a dating book. Specifically, I think it was called like Too Good to Leave, Too Bad to Stay. And it's like, if you knew that you had to kiss, like if you knew you had to date like 20 duds before you got to the right person, you would not be wasting your 3 years, girl, on each of these sad sack relationships. You would date somebody new every day for 20 days and just be done with it, right? And the same thing is true in design. We can't spend 3 years on our first hat pattern. You can't do it. Make it, publish it. When you grow to hate it, you can pull it down. The learning curve is real steep. You're going to learn so much in your first 2 years. You cannot get stuck going back and being like, well, I know better now, so I want to regrade this and re-release it. You can't do that. You got to keep moving. And it's impossible, and you have to do it anyway.
I absolutely love this. What a quotable thing. date all the frogs, quick.
Get out there and kiss those frogs, girl. Yeah.
And then not be afraid. I mean, I think in that is a lot of just doing the hard things and then not worrying so much. The process is where you grow.
And you have to trust that if you mess something up, that you will be humble enough to amend it to the person who was unhappy with what they got. There's a tremendous amount of humility, I think, in just being really ready to be wrong. Because that's what it is. Like to let go of perfectionism is to be ready to be wrong and to be prepared to deal with the consequences of that. And for those of us who are perfectionists, like that can feel like an existential threat. And it takes a lot, I think, of bravery and vulnerability to show up and be ready to be wrong and to be ready to say to a customer, I was wrong. I'm going to send you your money back and I'm going to fix the pattern. Yeah.
It's like designing with integrity.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, swung right back around to trust and integrity.
Yeah.
which is in itself a valuable product. I mean, there isn't much in the consumerism base of our society where we get such an excellent opportunity to have an integral and integrity relationship with the people who are selling
connection.
Yeah.
Connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty valuable. Well, we're almost to the end of our questions. So those of you who are watching live, please toss your questions into the comments because we want to hear what you have to say too.
So I've had enough of this emotion. So what are you excited about now? What's going on for you? What are you excited about?
Okay. There's a number of things I'm excited about. I think the thing I'm most excited about is I am planning in the next year to do a yoke sweater. And if you look at my catalog, there are not any yoke sweaters because I have some technical objections to them.
Okay, I want to hear it. I want to hear the objections because
okay.
I just had a long conversation with someone about, stacking, doing wedges or doing the stacked increases.
Yeah. So with the caveat that I haven't done these before, my fundamental objection is that a yoke sweater is predicated on an even increase all the way around the body, and our bodies don't do that.
Yeah.
And so I think
you want to crack the nut.
I'm going to crack this nut. Yeah. And I know I know that there are a lot of people out there who are doing like a raglan yoke hybrid.
Right.
And I know it lies in there. And I know that I'm going to have to get my head all the way around it. I suspect that it's pretty hard to serve people without having charts for different sizes with different rates of increase. But it just feels to me like, why are we not assigning the stitches that are at the neck and the front and the back, and then looking at the relationship between the sleeve and the body the same way we would do with a raglan? Like you just start with a circumference at the neck and a circumference at the bust. And, then your sleeve stitches for some sizes are going to end up in the front of the neck. I'm just like, I don't. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm going to dig into it.
I think
once I get obsessive about something geometric, I tend to like just go down a rabbit hole with it. But then I feel like I get it. So yeah. What's up, Christina?
Oh, I want to go the other way. I want to find out why that is that way in the first place. Right. And I think that it's just that maybe those sweaters just are not about fit.
They're not. They're about covering your body, right? Like historically, those sweaters had like deep armholes and they were sacks. And that's not what people want now. They want something different. Yeah. But now people want shirts that do that are knit that way. And so how do we give them this thing that they're asking us for in a way that keeps its promise?
So for raglan, the yoke is basically a rectangle. And a circular yoke is a circle. I wonder if there's a way to do it as an ellipse.
Yeah, that's what we need to do. Yeah, the wedges should be different for the sleeves for the body, and they should probably be different for every dang size. And how do you balance that with the fact that that's not doable? We're going to create the same sweater.
Mm-hmm.
That's exciting, though. I can't wait to see.
Yeah.
Well, we might have to have you back on and have you discuss.
No pressure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm overwhelmed by it and excited by it.
Love it. That's so exciting. So let's ask you some fun questions.
Yeah.
What's your favorite yarn to work with? You were talking about learning how you've been learning about different
Yeah, the yarn's not just yarn. What's your favorite?
properties of
Targi.
yarn and fabric.
Targi.
Oh.
It's my favorite.
So
my favorite fiber. I have a lot of sensory integration issues and cannot wear just any old thing touching my body. Targi hits a beautiful balance of being a fine micron count, and it tends to be tightly enough spun that there's not like little crunchy things like sticking out and touching me. But it also has grip and loft. I love it. I love it so much. I knit a medium size and excuse me. And so garment weight in a size 5 out of 12 on my size range. So my size range goes from 28 bust to 72-inch bust. So I'm pretty close to the middle there. At my size, garment weight begins to be a little bit of an issue, right? And so a loftier yarn that has good structure in it for me is important for a lot of my for a lot of sweaters that I make for myself. So unless I'm counting on the drape of a sweater, so this is a super fine merino. It's also a non-superwash, but it's super fine and it's very soft and it has a lot more drape. So this is a fingering weight so that I don't run into that garment weight issue. But it just has naturally a lot more drape because of its low micron count. It's a more slippery yarn. And so for me, for a lot of the sweaters I knit, I'm looking for a balance of wearability and structure and lightweight. And so, yeah, Targi's a sweet spot for me.
Okay, but what weight? DK, sport?
I like to wear fingering weight. I have yet to knit with a Targi fingering weight. If you see one, send it my way. I usually find it in DK.
In DK, or is worsted too like pretty common?
I get hot. DK is pretty common for Targi.
Yeah.
Brooklyn Tweed's Arbor is Targi, and that's one of the most wearable yarns in our house in terms of itch factor. My daughter can wear it every single day over a tank top and had. I'm working in a design with modus operandi and Mo fibers, and that's also Targi, and it's a light worsted. So that's a sweet spot. Anything more than that, and I get hot.
Yeah.
I like to make shirts mostly, not sweaters.
When you're designing, do you find that you gravitate towards the same weights, or do you find that you have to swatch a lot of different types and weights and fibers?
Oh, I think it comes together in the vision of the garment. A garment with 10 inches of positive ease is not going to be a worsted weight sweater, right? It's going to be fingering or sport. And usually, people ask which comes first, the yarn or the design, and I think they come together. Maybe even the design first. And most of my knitters are women of a certain age, right? And they get hot. And I mostly gravitate personally towards fingering and support weights because I don't want to be changing my clothes all day. That's distracting. I would just want clothes that I can put on. That's why, like I said, I gravitate towards shirts rather than sweaters.
I love it. That's pretty exciting. All right, Christina.
So what's your favorite knitting or crochet notion?
My measuring tape.
Oh man, finally someone picked mine.
Oh, is that yours?
Absolutely.
I felt so clever.
Oh.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, you can make do with just about anything else, but you can't get a thing that fits without a measuring tape.
I also have like a 6-inch ruler, that was my mother's, when she was a kid, that I have in my knitting bag. Yeah, oh my God, measuring tape.
My second one is my quilting 6x24 ruler that I use for blocking.
Yes.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, people need to be stealing more from sewists. They get all the cool, useful techniques and tools. I think
especially as we're talking more about making sure we're offering good fit for knitters, I think you're right.
I 100% agree. Like the Ann Budd clear ruler, right? I've been doing that for a long time with my clear. Yep. And this is bigger. And you've got the sewist tools and quilting tools are, we got to snag them.
Yeah. And I mean, so many people, I try not to be too much of a perfectionist. I like to say there's no one right way, but nothing curls my toes faster than a picture of something blocking that is not measured and it's just plopped down ish. It drives me nuts. Like I really want people to know more about blocking to measurements because it is the secret key to garments that fit and look well.
Okay. So there's a topic for a future newsletter. Huh?
Blocking to measurements.
How do you
Okay.
Go ahead.
So are you blocking your swatch too? Like so we don't pin swatches here on Tech Tip Talk.
I don't pin my swatch. No, that's illegal.
Oh, okay.
The knitting police will come to your house if you do that. Yeah.
We get you.
No, I don't. I think that if you trust your, okay, so here's what I think. Here's my theory. I think that people make gauge swatches that are small. If we're lucky, they'll go up to 6 inches, but let's be real, usually they're like 2. And so there's no stretch on the yarn. There's no weight. And that's fine. You can ask your yarn to do that. It will do that once it's dry. But then when they get their garment wet, it does stretch out and get all misshapen. And they think they're stuck with that. They don't realize that if you block your yarn to the measurements that your swatch predicted, it will dry that way and stay that way. And so I make a bigger gauge swatch.
How big?
Obviously.
Come on.
Minimum 6.
6 by 6, right?
Yeah.
Not like 6 by.
No, 6 by 6. Yes. Forget. Minimum 6 by 6 inches square. And I wet block it, and I like to let it dry on a smooth surface so that it doesn't have anything impeding it shrinking back up to what it wants to be as it dries. So it can creep along. So I'll like either like my marble countertops, granite countertops. And then when my yarn is soaking, I take pins and my schematic and I pin out the outline. And then after I do the yarn burrito, I drop it in there and pat it into the dimensions it's supposed to be. And that does a couple things, right? Like, first of all, it ensures that you're
the yarn burrito. Wait, say that again.
Oh, with the towel.
Towel.
When you step on it.
Roll your pieces up in a towel, and then this would be seamless then?
What?
No,
like when it's all done, you soak it, you spin it, you roll it up in a towel, and you step all over it to get the water out.
I block my pieces before I seam them. It makes seaming 10 times easier and more smooth, and it makes sure that you're seaming things. Tension's a big deal in seaming, right? And we want to make sure that our arms are the same length. And so measuring your seams as you go to make sure they're the same. But yeah, I mean, your things will line up if they match the dimensions on the schematic, right? You won't end up with a situation where your fronts and backs aren't the same length and you're not sure how to seam them together if you block them to measurements before you seam them. I think
that's an important point that, seamless garments are so popular, right? And I think it's an important point that, all this talk we do about measuring and being correct and making your swatches big enough, blocking them properly, all that stuff really matters when you have to piece all the pieces together.
Yep.
I mean,
yeah, but like if you block them before you go, like, first of all, you get a finished object the first time you wear it that doesn't have a crease on the sleeve, and that's beautiful. It's one of the reasons I hate things that are knitting around is I hate that crease the first time I wear it. I don't want it to look like it's been in a drawer. And yeah, I mean, you can steam it out, but yeah, I mean, seaming is a breeze if you block things with pins and a ruler before you do it. It opens up that selvage. It's really easy to see where to put your needle. Everything lines up perfectly. It's a nice, soothing, very zen experience instead of a frustrating, like tangled mess experience.
So what's your favorite method of seaming? Do you use mattress stitch or something else?
I use mattress stitch.
That's fantastic.
It's so invisible and it adds so much structure. I love it.
I love it. And how do you block to measurements? Do you use a board? Okay, I'm sorry, Christy. Christy's laughing at me. I want deets. I want details.
Yeah,
a grid board, or do you?
No, I use a ruler.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have a cutting table that I bought because I had a dog and my dog kept stepping on my things while I was blocking them. And also, I have a difficult back. And so I was like, okay, I want this to be at a good height. If you want the dates, I work on a cutting table. And I put down, I have the fuzzy like Cocoa Knits squares. And so I put down blocking mats and I use a 6x12 quilting ruler to measure out the grid. I think I have a blog post about this somewhere. I can send it.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Blocked
Love it.
measurements. And that's why my schematics look the way that they do, right? Like I know that we have a big conversation about giving people more measurements than they need in a pattern, right? Because we don't necessarily want to overwhelm and kill them. But like I want people to have everything they need from I provide finished measurements, but then I also provide those blocking measurements. Because when you seam up and you lose that stitch selvage on either side, you still want your sweater to be the right size. So I think you need those blocking measurements to get a finished project that matches the expectations. And I give almost all the measurements so that people can pin that out perfectly and just drop their sweater in and have it be easy breezy.
We 100% agree with you. Absolutely. Yes. Fantastic. It's exciting. So let's wrap this up. How can people find you online, Jen? And are you taking on new clients? Okay, new clients in the sense of, are you doing any coaching or anything like that?
Yeah. So you've put my website up there. It's jpknitsthings.com. Also on Instagram at jp_knits_things. So you can find me on Instagram. You can find the newsletter sign up is on my website, and you can find links to my patterns there too. And also, yeah, you can book me if you go to learn with me on my website. I do consultations with knitters who are looking for a one-on-one coaching session, and we can either talk about your wardrobe or we can talk about making a modification or going through a fit issue, or like if you know that your sweaters aren't fitting quite perfectly, but you don't have a background to know like what exactly is causing that issue, we can get on Zoom and I can ask you to pinch out an inch here or there, or tell you what I'm seeing. And yes, I am always booking consultations with knitters. And then, yeah, I also do some design consulting. So if you're a designer,
a lot of designers, and you do that too.
And I do something very similar with designers. Most of my design clients work with me before they start grading. So they've come up with their idea, they've come up with their schematic, and maybe they're not sure about how they're going to approach something, or they want a second set of eyes. And so we can spend an hour. We can do a lot in an hour. I can overwhelm you in an hour. But we get on together and we talk about what I'm seeing in the schematic. I ask you how you're going to address XYZ, or we talk about challenges that you're having. And I have clients that I do all the grading for them, or I have clients who just check in with me a little bit before they launch design. So there's all sorts of ways that we can work together.
Super valuable. Thank you for offering this service to our industry. I feel like we're on our way when we have more happening, more community, more connection. So thank you for being here today and talking with us in depth about all of the things that are wonderfully happening in your business and with you.
Thank you for sharing so much about your thought process on all these things. We really appreciate it. And I know that everybody listening does too.
Yeah, Anita just told us that tons of good tips and techniques. I need to watch this one again. And I feel the same way. I'm going to really enjoy chaptering this one.
Well, thank you for having me. We got to grapple with some of this stuff out loud. Like, we're not going to have the answers right away, and that's okay. But, I think that it's important to model not knowing where we don't know the answers. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk with you about some juicy stuff. I love it. I love big conversations.
So thanks a lot. We'll just say bye now, and then we'll do some announcements. Thanks, Jen, for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So much.
All right. That was fun.
So good. And she's right. It's important to not just think about these things on our own, but to talk about them and, have a space to do that. So I'm really glad we were able to do that with her today.
And this episode was made possible because we have Patreons. We have patrons who support our broadcast every month. Our broadcast takes some cost. And so we appreciate and we give our deepest thanks to our patrons who support us with their time and effort, also on our Discord network.
We have a really great group, really a bunch of really great people that we're really grateful for, really.
And
so check it out. Here's our website.
And yes, please come and join us. This helps us to cover our costs, but it also gives us a great way to connect with you all on a deeper level than just once a month here on the broadcast. And we would love to have you. We do send a newsletter once a month, and you can subscribe here that way. Subscribe over there. There's a button to say subscribe here on YouTube. We'd love to have you get our notifications of when we post new videos. And you can sign up for our newsletter on our website, which is also in the link. We send just a couple newsletters a month, giving you updates and replays and information about our upcoming book, which we found out will be published in the fall of 2023, all about how to write a great knitting pattern, which we're pretty excited about.
I mean, it should be a one-stop shop, you know?
We're hoping we'll put a tech editor in your back pocket, which will be really exciting.
That's the goal.
Next month, we have a new broadcast, December 19th, same time. And we'd love to see you here. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you in a month. Bye, everyone.
Everybody.